Welcome to another episode of Conversations with the Co-op, where we explore essential topics in the world of special education. I'm your host, Jeffrey Lee, K-12 Special Education Coordinator with the Paul Bunyan Education Cooperative. Today we're diving into the topic of assistive technology and its role in supporting students with disabilities. Joining me is Morty Aldous, our low incidence coordinator of physical impairment, other health disabilities, traumatic brain injuries, and assistive technology at the Paul Bunyan Education Cooperative. Morty, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jeff. Good to be here.
Let's start with the basics. Assistive technology is a term that kind of gets thrown around, it gets discussed. It's part of every IEP meeting, but not everyone is clear about what is actually assistive technology and what it means. Could you help us define assistive technology and explain how it differs from accommodations or modifications?
Sure. It is thrown a lot. People are confused about what is assistive technology and what it isn't. So IDEA explains and defines assistive technology in two components. So we have devices or tools, and we have services. So device examples might be wheelchairs, screen readers, everything down to visual schedules and fidgets. And those services are that consideration that the law requires. It's providing that tool, procuring it, providing training, working with the student, ongoing evaluation. So that's the law's definition and the law's requirement. How does it differ from accommodations and modifications? Accommodations are making a change to how a task is done. For instance, giving students an extra 10 minutes on a test is an accommodation. So assistive technology could be an accommodation. That's one of the areas where you can document assistive technology. A modification is where you're changing the task itself. So maybe you're changing the test requirements, reducing the number of answers, those sorts of things. Typically, assistive technology is not a modification. Assistive technology can get confused a lot, and I think you said you weren't going to talk about this later, but really assistive technology is a tool that helps something complete the same tasks that the other students are doing. And this often will help them do this task independently, so it's accommodation.
When I think one of the things that gets confusing for people is they hear the word technology and they confuse that with like, oh, well, computers, or we got to bring in a AAC device or something like that, which could be, but isn't always what assistive technology is, right?
That's right. Assistive technology, the big thing to think about is in the schools and elsewhere beyond school, assistive technology is technology that a person with a disability uses. A person without a disability is just using a tool or a technology because maybe they choose to use it. For instance, I love to use speech to text for doing some of my reports. I just find it's time effective for me, the number I have to do. However, I don't have a disability that affects my ability to type or anything like that, so I choose to use it. Whereas assistive technology refers to somebody who has a disability and they may be unable to complete that task independently, or they may need that tool to help them complete the task more efficiently. For instance, a student who had some motor issues or components and they can write, but they can't keep up with the rigor of the writing and the amount of the writing in school without that assistive technology.
So to put this in a different context, I used to work at a camp where we would have some students who would come in with disabilities. They had an archery range and they had a special one that had a lever on it. It looked kind of like a crossbow, right? And so all the kids kind of wanted to use that one, but they could operate the bows, except we had a few students or campers who came in and they needed to use that because they couldn't actually do the activity. They needed that lever action on there in order to do it because of their disability. So what you're saying is that that device, that lever action bow, would be assistive technology. It could be used by anyone, but to actually participate in the activity, that individual with the disability needed that device or they couldn't actually do the activity.
Correct, correct.
And so in more of an educational setting, we're looking at what are those educational activities that they need to do. And so assistive technology, if it's used by a non-disabled student, is just something. But
Right.
as soon as that has to be used for them to actually participate in that, that's assistive technology.
Right, and a very common example that gets confusing for people post-COVID, now that we're all one-to-one technology devices, all the students have a Chromebook, where can get confusing is if you have a student who requires a Chromebook to do those tasks, we still need to list that as assistive technology. You know, previous to being one-to-one devices, that was easy to remember because those were the only students with devices, right? Everybody in the classroom has access to it. Everybody in the classroom can use it. Right. Everyone in the classroom could probably use their speech to text. But if you have a student who requires that special consideration, then it's assistive technology, and we need to list that in the IEP.
So another way to kind of think of it, I know we're always looking at, do we need to add something so this student or person can access this, but it might actually help to reframe it sometimes to look at, in the absence of this device, would they be able to participate in the activity?
Right.
If the device is absent and they cannot access the activity, that device is assistive technology.
Right, and another thing that you just said there that prompted my brain to go off track a little bit here is the law changed in the last definition of IDEA. For a long time, it was to give them access, to be able to participate. Now that a law kind of takes it a step further, so kind of being able to participate at the same rate. So not at the same rate in the terms of, everybody gets an A,
Right.
but being able to keep pace. Will it enhance their ability to participate in school? So we can't just say, well, we don't have to give them word prediction to type faster because they can type. But if they're falling behind and can't keep up with their peers in the pace of school, we still need to consider that.
So it gets back into that progress monitoring type of thing. If they're making adequate progress, then we're good. But even if they're able to complete the task, but they are not making adequate progress with their peers,
Correct.
then we haven't really addressed it appropriately.
Correct.
That's a really helpful distinction. Can we talk a little bit about what makes assistive technology effective? Can you share some of the essential elements of assistive technology plan? For example, what goes into evaluating and implementing the right tool for a student?
So I think it goes down to the basics of what the law asks us to do. We must consider assistive technology for every student on an IEP, at least annually. Ideally, we all are thinking about it all the time. I mean, teachers are constantly thinking, this just isn't working. What can we do better? That's considering. That's putting that careful thought in. And during that consideration process, really focusing on that careful thought and reflection on that specific student and the tasks they need to accomplish. Those are key into helping you get to the right tool. So the SET framework is something some of them have heard about. We don't probably have a lot of time to go in it, but it stands for student, environment, and tasks. Those are the things we're considering, and those are the things that are going to help us figure out the right tool. One of the things I learned early on in what makes assistive technology effective is making sure we're including the student in this process. For instance, if we're as a team saying, let's do speech to text, and we haven't included the student's thoughts on that, and we come back and say, this is the tool for you, and the student says, I am not sitting in my 10th grade government class and speaking out loud in my computer. We've just picked an ineffective tool. So including that student is super important. Learning how to use the tool you're giving to your students. We can't just hand a student a tool and expect them to know how to use it. So taking that moment or 5 minutes, depending on how complicated the tool might be, to learn the basics of using the tool. It's really important that we don't just show a student how to use a tool and send them on their way. We need to be integrating it throughout their day. On the tasks, they're going to need to be able to do that. The team should all know how to use a tool, and sometimes that includes a parent, depending on the tool and what they're using it for. If we're implementing a tool that they need to get their work done in school, do we need to train the parent on its use because they might need it for homework? So those are sorts of things. Tracking that data. People talk about, oh, we'll call Morty, she's the AT specialist, right? Here's the deal. Assistive technology is like 75% research. Like, what's out there? So you're going out and you're looking and you're trying to find the right thing. A lot of times the first one you pick may not do what you need it to do. So making sure that you're following up with some data, and it doesn't have to be complicated. Is it working? Is it not working? You know, and you can find out a lot of things. Well, maybe it works in English, but it's not working in science. So stopping and taking a look, a lot of times that data might tell you, you know what? Assistive technology might not be the answer. Maybe the student hasn't learned the skill they need to actually accomplish this task. You know, and then that progress monitoring, that continual consideration. So those are what I think makes assistive technology effective. A saying in the AT world is not seeing it on the shelf. Don't hand a tool that every time, you know, it comes out only when somebody's going to monitor that data. It should be out and being used and integrated. And
I kind of think when I used to teach CPR, you know, and we would always talk about airway, breathing, and circulation. But one of the first things to do would be to ask somebody, are you okay? If they answer you, I've got airway, breathing, and circulation, right? And I can kind of see where progress monitoring, a goal, if a student is making progress, we can expect that the tool that they're using, the assistive technology, is working. We can see that the student is making progress. It's when we aren't making that progress that then we need to step back and go, is it the tool that we've provided? Is it the training that we have provided? Is it the fact that the student doesn't have the skills to complete the task even with the device? So it does back us up a little bit when they aren't making progress, but to do progress monitoring, and if they are making that progress, we wouldn't have to go back and look at all of those elements again because we've accomplished the goal, right?
Correct. And in doing that thought process, you're doing what the law requires. That's consideration.
Right.
And then you're going into the IEP and you're checking the yes box and saying, yep, they're using AT, it's working, we don't need anything new, boom, you're done.
I love it, I love it. So finally, Morty, let's bring it back into the classroom a little bit more. How does assistive technology fit into like the daily practice of a teacher? Not just special ed teachers, but maybe classroom teachers too. Can you give us an example of how teachers can incorporate assistive technology into their routines and what kind of support they might need to do so successfully?
I think the number one thing about incorporating assistive technology for your different students and things into the classroom is really utilizing those principles of universal design for learning when you're making your lesson plans. Thinking about all of the students you have, what assistive technology they may or may not be using, how access will be for them, and planning your lesson to accommodate all of that so you're not creating 8 lessons. You know, if you know you have a student in your class who needs a screen reader and you're making your chapter packet for your class, make sure you know you're using those tabs in your Google. Make sure it's readable before you push it out into Google. And that way, you know, you don't have to then run and do something different for the students. Or if you have students that you know you're going to need some text leveling in, you know, have that all ready to go so that, you know, you're not having to scramble and do 2 or 3 different lesson plans. That's the number one thing I would say. The next thing it would be is to have that student practice using that tool in that academic environment. If they're only using that tool when they go off to their case manager or their SLP or their OT, then they're not getting that practice integrating it in and carrying it over to be used in the classroom independently. So I think that's important. I think training is important. Unfortunately, teachers don't get a ton of time, but the good thing about assistive technology is that there is a ton out there for free. Everybody in the co-op has access to Infinitech. There are a ton of webinars out there you can use for professional development. There you can certainly go on to the teacher training binder and find some resources. You can always reach out to me if there's a tool you're going to be using, but just staying up with some of that, knowing where to find resources to trial. Don't go out and purchase something if you don't know it's going to work. Right. We have the lending library here at the co-op. There's the Minnesota Star Library, which is free. That's at https://mn.atforall.com. And they have everything high tech to low tech. It's free. You do have to pay shipping back. And then a lot of vendors, some of the reading pen vendors will let you trial one. So time, I think, is the number one. Yep. Planning your lessons to include it is number two. And, educating yourself on it.
And I kind of want to back up a little bit, like the universal design for learning and going way back to our first definition of what assistive technology is. Like, there are things that I think a lot of teachers use in their classroom that benefit students, or that something as simple as like closed captioning on videos, right? That could become assistive technology if you have a student who is hard of hearing.
Correct.
Right? So it wouldn't be something extra. It might even be something that you're doing on a regular basis, but we would still need to include that in that IEP to say, this student can't access this without this, so we need to have this as assistive technology. So we can kind of run the gambit of classroom materials that are there already, that all the students are using, to something a little more complex that is going to require a little more training, require some practice and skill building on it too. But I think it's really important to see that sometimes assistive technology is not really as cumbersome as people think it is.
Right. And where it becomes cumbersome is when we haven't designed our materials in a manner that's accessible to the majority. There's always times where, like for instance, Braille, where you're going to have to, plan ahead and get it to the Braille list. It's not going to be, the teacher's not going to have that right in their pocket. Right. But things like screen readers and interacting with digital writing and things like that, if we've developed our materials to the best of our ability with accessibility in mind, and chances are you're not going to have to do anything to it for your students.
And I do think it's a lot like, I use the analogy a lot with medication, right? Like, we have to try a few different things, but once we find the right thing, it becomes a lot easier. Right. It becomes, we've hit our stride, and this isn't going to be a complicated ongoing process. But once, it's going to take us a little bit to get there, but once we do, it is worth the investment that we put in.
Definitely, definitely. It can really, not only does it make the student independent, and it gives them a big value of self-worth when they don't have to have somebody else hovering over them and doing things. It increases their learning. There's a lot of studies that show graduation rates are much higher on students who become proficient with their assistive technology.
Absolutely. Morty, thank you so much for sharing your expertise on assistive technology today. I think your explanations have really highlighted how it can empower students and really make that meaningful impact on their educational journey.
Thanks, Jeff. It was good to be here.
Well, that wraps up this episode of Conversations with the Co-op. We hope that you found the discussion on assistive technology insightful and practical. Don't forget to subscribe and tune in to more episodes where we explore the latest in special education. Until next time.